morning, good afternoon, good evening. Yesterday, we started discussing this video clip. Ramaphosa issues final warning to Zimbabwe. SADC heads met about 2 weeks ago. And South Africa is the chairperson of the SADC regional grouping after the Madagascar military coup, and Madagascar stripped of chairmanship because of that. And at that SADC meeting, according to Inside Africa Network, South Africa's President Ramaphosa reminded Zimbabwe that the region can really not afford to have rigged elections and all this talk of him trying to extend his stay in power beyond 2028. Let's just listen to the video clip and we can comment on it.
Zimbabwe, SAD shocked, reported by Takura Shoko, Inside Africa Network. Good day, Southern Africa. Good day, Zimbabwe. This is Takura Shoko with Inside Africa Network. And today we go straight into a story shaking the foundations of regional politics. A story that insiders say has left SADC leaders stunned, diplomatic channels buzzing, and State House in Harare scrambling to redefine its next move. We are talking about a warning. Not a loud one, not a public one, but a firm final message delivered quietly by South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa during a secret leaders-only SADC consultation held last week. A message aimed directly at Zimbabwe's political direction. A message urging Harare to respect constitutional limits. A message that said in polite diplomatic language that Southern Africa will not tolerate a return to lifetime rulers disguised as presidents. This is the story. Part 1. How we got here. Over the last few months, Zimbabwe's political climate has been boiling. Conversations about extending presidential terms to 2030 have grown louder. Senior ZANU-PF officials have been dropping hints. Some state media voices flirted with the idea. And a few individuals online even suggested Naga was too intelligent and too experienced to step down.
Honestly, I've known the people of Gaza for a long time because I used to come support.
Sorry about that.
That is where the problem began. SADC leaders have been watching closely, because Zimbabwe is not an island. When Zimbabwe suffers, the region suffers. When Zimbabwe's politics go off balance, migration increases, borders tighten, economies shake, and regional development slows down. So when whispers of a 2030 extension reached Pretoria, Gaborone, Windhoek, and Lusaka, the democratic bloc inside ADC stepped in. According to multiple insiders who briefed us, a private meeting was called. Only 4 countries were involved: South Africa, Botswana, Namibia, and Zambia. The 4 most democratic voices in the region. They met quietly under the banner of governance renewal and regional stability. And Ramaphosa did not mince his message. Part 2, the warning that shocked.
We'll stop it there. We played the other 2, part 2, part 3, and part 4 yesterday. But we'll just want to play the introduction so that those who missed this particular video can have a gist of what we are talking about. If you want to listen to the whole video, and I strongly recommend that you do, you can find it on YouTube if you Google the title at the bottom of your screen. It's well worth listening to. Then, we discussed this yesterday. Where are we now?
I think yesterday, for those that missed, we had a very good discussion, and like you said, you know, telling somebody will not be enough. I also urge that, you know, our fellow Zimbabweans and listeners out there take time to actually hear the whole, you know, parts from part 1 up to part 4, and probably catch on and move forward. And you know, in our discussion yesterday, I think we drew a conclusion that, you know, SADC cannot continue, you know, carrying Zimbabwe, you know, and Zimbabwe's burden on our on you know, on our behalf. Zimbabwe is now causing so much pain to other nations, and we were talking about, you know, how even it has affected, you know, migration. Now we have, you know, organizations or parties like Dudula in South Africa that are causing, you know, xenophobia, you know, and rightfully, you know, they are right, because we know that over 3 million uh, migrants, you know, from Zimbabwe are, are staying in South Africa, and many of those are illegal, and they are using up South African resources, you know, therefore burdening the country, and you know, obviously the citizens that are taxpayers would feel, you know, the bite to say, you know, hold on a minute, we are paying, but then the other guys are not. And this is not just in South Africa. Zimbabweans are all over now, you know, Mozambique, Zambia, Botswana is one of the other countries that has got a lot of, you know, Zimbabwean migrants. So it's, you know, and also how SADC would look by just keeping quiet, because we have seen now that, you know, ZANU PF's hand, especially when it comes to rigging elections, has now is not only, you know, been local in Zimbabwe, but they have crossed over. They've had a hand in Mozambique, where we also saw that, you know, Zimbabwean nationals were given IDs to go and vote for the ruling party in Mozambique, which caused a lot of, you know, rift within Southern Africa, where Mozambican nationals were now accusing Zimbabweans. And that is huge, you know. So this stance by, you know, Cyril Ramaphosa is long overdue, if I may say, because, you know, the more you continue letting ZANU PF get away, or Zimbabwean government get away with the atrocities that they're causing, the more it's going to strain, you know, SADC itself. So, you know, for the listeners, I would say, you know, let's try and catch up and listen to this year. Then we all know, you know, where we are going and our next move, because SADC is really doing its part. It's unfortunate that a lot of people do not realize this, but SADC has been doing so much since the GNU, since, you know, 2023, where they came through and said, you know, nullified our elections. And unfortunately, you know, we also talked about the opposition, how clueless and incompetent they are, who have since now started thinking with their belly and not their heads, and not the future of Zimbabweans. In short, our opposition is now more ZANU PF, you know, in their operations and in their dealings. You know, I think, you know, that's just the summary of it.
Well, I would like to address this issue of, can SADC really do something here? Or is this just talk? And to those who don't believe SADC could do it, I'd like to remind them that it was SADC, specifically South Africa, that refused to give legitimacy to ZANU-PF following the 2008 rigged elections and forced the regime to go into the GNU. To some of you who may not have watched this video clip of Dr. Ibo Mandaza explaining what happened during the 2008 elections and leading up to the GNU. Have a listen to this.
I also know that Mugabe conceded defeat on 2008. He found Mbeki and Obasanjo to concede defeat. I hope that Thabo Mbeki and Obasanjo will one day make that public. But one of them, I won't say which one, told me that Mugabe phoned them that Saturday night and said, look, I lost election and I concede defeat. And I know that Mugabe stuck to his guns. I was prepared to go. His wife was since bags packed to go somewhere on the following day when Mnangagwa and Chiwenga approached him and said, you stay where you are. And then they contrived the runoff, sadly with the help of South Africa. And runoff took place, very violent. 360 people were killed. I don't know. The South African, I came here as part of a delegation to Cape Town to see members of the ANC. I don't want to mention names, they're my friends. I saw them, and through them, a cabinet committee subcommittee of South African cabinet was set up on the Zimbabwe issue. It was on the basis of that cabinet committee that South Africa did not recognize the runoff. And indeed, it was the basis of that committee that Thabo sent the generals to South Africa, to Zimbabwe. I met them, and I was one of the few to have read the report, because I was flying to Joburg in the company of General Romano, who was a friend. He passed away, no? So, yeah. And I also took people who had lost their hands in the violence to the South African embassy in Harare. And Romano broke down in tears. How can a liberation movement treat these people like that? He was a broken man. So there's no doubt at all here in South Africa as to the brutality of the regime in Harare. So it amazes me, it angers me, in fact, when I hear the nonsense coming out of people like Mbalula's mouth. They know it. And the report is never...
So the truth of the matter is the GNU of 2008 to 2013 was a result of South Africa stepping up and saying no to ZANU-PF. There can be no denying that. Yes, as much as many Zimbabweans have been critical of SADC, that nothing came out of that GNU because SADC did not push for change. One can argue that SADC could have done a lot more to make sure that the democratic reforms were implemented. They did not. But you cannot also deny that the burden of failing to implement reforms has to be laid at the door of Morgan Tsvangirai and his MDC friends. They had the opportunity to implement reforms. They failed to implement even one reform. That is a historic fact. And I think the most important issue here, if I was a SADC leader, would be, as much as we would want to push ZANU-PF to accept more democratic reforms, hopefully leading to free, fair, and credible elections, how are we going to achieve it? That is an important point. And that is a point that cannot be ignored. SADC leaders would not want to push hard to get Zimbabwe into another GNU, only to find that the players in that GNU are the same as from the first GNU. Because if they are, I can rest assure you, nothing will be done. So the question then that, Ben, I would like you to think about and maybe give your comment on, what is there that could make you believe that if SADC was to push ZANU-PF to accept a new GNU, that new GNU will implement the democratic reforms, given that the first one, the 2008 to 2013, failed to implement even one token reform?
You know, Robert, when we leave the door open to say SADC should have done more during the GNU, we are actually going to use that as a ticket for our failure. And personally, I don't think we should leave that door open, because SADC brought two groups of organizations or people, the opposition and the ruling, to sit down at the table and discuss their future. Remember, the future of Zimbabwe is in Zimbabweans' hands. SADC only facilitated. At any point, had MDC thought that it was not working out or it was being unfair, they could have simply walked out. They had nothing to lose. In fact, they had more power than ZANU-PF itself. Because even at negotiating the terms and conditions, they could have just said, this will not work for us, and walked out. But they took it on, right? And if SADC had decided to do the reforms, what would have been the purpose of having the MDC there? Nothing. Because basically we are just saying SADC had to do the job, and MDC would have been just paid to just sit in there. They were tasked, and in fact, they were told on numerous times, gentlemen, remember your priorities. What are they? Reforms. And SADC pushed through a lady representative, I forgot her name, and kept on knocking at MDC's door. Reforms, guys, up until it was Morgan Tsvangirai who went and reported SADC to Mugabe to say these people are worrying me. And obviously Mugabe, he talked and scolded and insulted the SADC representation. You see, so we have to get our history straight and stop lying to ourselves. MDC, we trusted them and we trusted you guys. And you obviously dropped the ball. And now to your question, and I agree with you to say, first of all, we have the same political players that were in the GNU. Are they going to be competent enough? I don't think so. Why? We are at a situation. I'll give you an example. We're at a situation where, we're obviously talking about Emerson Mnangagwa trying to extend his stay, and SADC are saying no to that, obviously. But we have a bigger problem, and that bigger problem is ZANU-PF rigging elections. And this is well documented, and it was adopted in the 2023 election report. And nothing has been said about that from the opposition. Rather, they are also dealing with the 2030. So the question now is, if you are willing, if you don't want 2030 election, that postponement to happen, but they are willing and they are quiet about 2028 election going on as planned without any reforms, implemented, which will definitely mean ZANU-PF will rig those elections. And I would say, we've gotten to an extent where the opposition have become so greedy and short-sighted that they are now willing to participate in rigged elections just to secure seats and be part, of the high table. I mean, there's so many examples where we have had Chamisa coming out saying, I've got, stringent measures. I've got bulletproof measures to win these elections. In fact, God has already ordained it, and I'm already, planning a cabinet. Such utterances, and SADC is listening. And here they are, they've been giving you recommendations. It's either they're foolish or you are. So if we are saying Nelson Jamisa can win rigged elections, it definitely means SADC is foolish because they're giving us recommendations to say fix. So how then do you want SADC to come and help you when you say you got this in the bag? See, this is the problem. And we've had, even as far as, advocate Fadzai Maeri, where she went, in an international, community meeting, where she declared and boasted that Triple C was going to win. And yet we were talking about, at that meeting, it was more of human rights. How do we get to fight for the right? And we know that Zimbabweans have been denied a right to a meaningful say, denied a right to a meaningful election. And we were supposed to have been addressing that. But here's somebody that goes all the way there to go and declare that it doesn't matter about all those, human rights infringements. We got this in the bag. So the question now is, who then helps when you don't need any help? This current crop of opposition that we have, I think they recycled enough. They've been used enough. And I can confidently say, even if they were given another opportunity, with their greediness and their, they're willing to accept bribes. I mean, we're talking of members that took 40,000, at the end of their term. This is taxpayers' money, and they shared the loot. They took out loans, and these loans will never be paid back. They got given cards at the end, which we know who gets a loan when you're going to be out of a job. If you go to a bank and you tell them I'm going to be bankrupt in 6 weeks, Are they going to give you money? Yet in Zimbabwe and the opposition, they went and were willing to take that money and they walked away with it. Now, right now, they don't want $170,000 car. They want two. And they complain that, their cars are getting broken down. Yet these are supposed to be service cars. Housing loans, when they travel from their house to Harare for a meeting, they want to go and sleep in a hotel. They want bush allowances, travel allowances, and all other allowances. So we can safely say these guys are in it for the money. It is a good investment. And they've always said it with their own mouths. Correct me if I'm wrong, when they said it was our hard-earned money that we used to campaign. We need it back. So I can confidently say, even if SADC is to facilitate another GNU, these kind of guys that we have here, we will rule this missed opportunity, and not just once. This is opportunities that are missed over and over again. 2008, 2013, 2023, and today. This latest is a very, very big opportunity, and none of them are talking about it. They want to keep us in there, and they pretend that they're crying with us, yet very, very excited with ZANU-PF.
My answer to the question is Zimbabwe ready to have a second bite at the cherry to implement the democratic reforms which will dismantle the ZANU-PF dictatorship? The answer, in my view, is no, we are not ready. If we start by looking at the opposition itself, the opposition, the MDC, CCC, they have never, or very few of them, have ever acknowledged that the 2008 to 2013 was the golden opportunity for them to implement the democratic reforms. So if you do not acknowledge your failure, what hope is there that you'll not repeat it? The other more subtle way
emphasized the importance of electoral integrity. Namibia raised concerns about corruption blocking regional development. South Africa.
Sorry about that. The other subtle way is the opposition, MDC, CCC, when they realized they failed to implement even one token reform at the end of the GNU in 2013, they decided to turn around and tell their supporters that they can still win elections because now they've devised ways of winning rigged elections. The real tragedy there is that millions of Zimbabweans out there believed it. So what's the point of being given another second chance to implement the democratic reforms if you can easily be convinced that you don't need reforms because you can still win rigged elections? That is something that SADC leaders out there have to take into consideration. As much as SADC would want to see Zimbabwe back on a democratic footing, it must be acknowledged that they cannot do it without Zimbabweans playing their part. At the present moment, the opposition and millions of their supporters do not see the need for implementing reforms so that the country can have free, fair, and credible elections. In 2023, we saw Chamisa telling his supporters that he has plugged all the vote rigging loopholes. He was going to win big. The tragedy is he was lying, and within a day of the voting, he himself was acknowledging that the elections were rigged. And yet, if you talk to some of the 2 million people who he conned to participate, they still believe in him. They still refuse to accept that he lied to them because of their personality cult mentality. He has become a demigod who can do no wrong. When you've got an opposition leaders who are so arrogant, they believe themselves to be demigods, and then millions of supporters who are so ignorant, naive, and gullible, they believe it, you have got a problem. Excuse me. So we'll play another bit of that video clip, and then we can discuss it. Thank you very much, Administrator.
Africa focused on constitutional respect and democratic norms. And together, these four countries formed what analysts are calling the SADC democratic bloc. Their message to Zimbabwe was not antagonistic, it was corrective. Do not tamper with the constitution. Do not push the region backwards. Do not create tension that might force SAC into crisis management mode again. One insider said the message felt like a gentle but unbreakable rope, pulling Zimbabwe back to the path of democratic order. Part 5. What this means for Mnangagwa. Mnangagwa now faces a dilemma. If he abandons the 2030 rumors, he looks weak to his loyalists. If he pursues the extension, he risks regional isolation. SAD has shifted. The era of leaders doing whatever they want is fading. You can already see it in Zambia, Namibia, Botswana, and South Africa. The region wants clean governance. The region wants transparent leadership. The region wants power to rotate. And the democratic bloc is serious. If Zimbabwe goes rogue, SADC can withhold support, increase diplomatic pressure, push for election monitoring, tighten trade and investment requirements, or escalate governance criticism. Zimbabwe cannot afford that. Not with the economy in ICU, not with investors running, not with citizens losing hope. Flash Part 6. SADC wants a new political culture. For decades, Africa was...
Thank you. I think this is really raising a dilemma for SADC as much as for Zimbabwe itself. There is no doubt that a country like South Africa, particularly when you look at the present moment, South Africa has been hosting the G20 nations. And that demands international leadership. And if in your own region, you still have pariah states who are becoming renowned for their chaotic way they run their economies, that does not augur well with South Africa's own aspiration as an international player. So in this particular instance, I believe that South Africa is feeling the pressure. They really want to be an international player, but they also realize that you can never assume that role when you have got rogue states around you. And Zimbabwe, without doubt, is a rogue state. Can South Africa succeed? Can it push Zimbabwe on a democratic footing? I think it's worth trying if I was President Cyril Ramaphosa. Whether or not they will succeed, like I said, will depend on whether or not there are Zimbabweans out there who have got the intellectual capacity to realize that this is a second bite at the cherry and will grab it and implement those democratic reforms. And if the truth be told, at the present moment, I really don't see that many Zimbabweans with that intellectual ability. Ben, do you want to give your closing remarks?
Politics in Africa is changing, though that will is slowly and gradually and grinding, but it's changing and turning. I mean, look at the once mighty ANC. They could not pull the required, threshold to be government themselves. They, for the first time, they had to go into a coalition. We go across Botswana. They have a young, vibrant president right now. Although, the economy is not doing very well because of, what is happening with the diamond industry, but that's young youthfulness is also coming into play. We have Zambia, where the opposition are now leaders. We go up, we've got Ibrahim Traore, who has now turned Burkina Faso's fortune into something that is, interesting and hopeful for the country itself. Then you have rogue elements who associate themselves with ZANU-PF and are pictured with ZANU-PF members. For example, what happened in Mozambique, where, like I had mentioned earlier, Zimbabwe nationals get IDs to go and vote in that election. We have in Tanzania, where a lady just jailed all opposition members and everybody took to the streets, but surprisingly, she won by over 90%. The world of politics is going to change. We have to move from that mindset of let's blame so and so for not doing the right things for ourselves. I believe, and I'm also sick and tired of people in Zimbabwe that say we will follow Chamisa because there is no other solution that is in sight. And I ask these people, look, are we that blind that we cannot see the solution has always been there? Solutions have been given, advice after advice has been given. It's only that we were following our personal leaders instead of using our minds to think for ourselves. And what makes us human is our ability to think, to envision tomorrow. But unfortunately for Zimbabwean politics, instead of going forward or progressing, we are going backwards. It reminds me of what Ian Smith says. It is pointless to give a vote to somebody that does not even understand its meaning. And then The question now is, do Zimbabweans understand what democracy is? What it needs us to do to achieve? Because just wanting democracy, wanting free, fair, and credible elections will not give us that. You got to work towards democracy. And democracy only only works when the people are knowledgeable enough. And a lot of people in Zimbabwe do not even know the primary purpose of the GNU. So then the question is, are we then going to be ready for this shift that is happening in the political arena? As Africa makes that step, are we Zimbabweans going to be always lagging? Because this is where we are at. We are a failed state and we are always way, way behind others. I mean, you look at economies, just compare Zimbabwean economy with a vast amount of minerals compared to Botswana, with just the one that they have. And they are faring far, far much better than us. That just shows that it is not about whatever you have. It is how you use it. We do not have that, intellectual capacity to think of today and then tomorrow. We are not understanding what politics is all about, what democracy is all about. This is why you find that ZANU-PF would rather have us politically incompetent. That way, they don't have to meet our demands. Or if they meet our demands, it will be the very basics. This is why they've impoverished the people in the rural areas, such that they continue focusing on, let me go and plant this so that at least tomorrow I can eat. Rather than wanting more out of a government, where you find, countries like South Africa, they demonstrate for more, and they want that more because it is expected of government. Yet in Zimbabwe, somebody builds, a trababulas, and he can forget about all the other, broken roads across the country. The question is, at what point, and I think this is the question, at what point are we going to realize that we have been the problem all along? Thank you.
I'd like to conclude my commentary tonight by referring to David Coulthard. In this book, David Coulthard admitted that the 2013 elections, this is the first elections post the GNU of 2008 to 2013, was so flawed, so illegal, that the only logical step was to withdraw. The immediate question then is, so why didn't they withdraw? And he explains it in that book. They were going to withdraw only if they could persuade their counterparts. Coulthard was in the MDC-N, N standing for Nume, and the other major MDC faction was MDC-T, T standing for Tsvangirai. They were only going to withdraw from those elections if they could form a coalition. And when that coalition failed to materialize, both factions participated, knowing fully well that participating would give ZANU-PF legitimacy. They also participated, knowing fully well that ZANU-PF was giving a few gravy train seats to entice the opposition to participate. So we are in this political mess because, first of all, the MDC leaders sold out on implementing reforms during the GNU. And secondly, they've been participating in flawed elections out of greed. So SADC giving the same individuals the opportunity would not change anything. These individuals will participate in the flawed elections as long as they know they'll get some gravy train seats. ZANU-PF, of course, would not want to implement any meaningful reforms because they are the ones who are benefiting from the status quo. So the people of Zimbabwe have got to realize that they cannot entrust ZANU-PF or the MDC-CCC leaders with implementing the democratic reforms necessary to end the ZANU-PF dictatorship, even if SADC was to push for a second GNU. The people themselves have got to say, no, we cannot have the same players who sold out last time involved in the next one. And I believe SADC itself, the SADC leaders, will be looking to Zimbabweans to start articulating that position. Because as long as Zimbabweans are quiet out there, and SADC leaders can see a situation where even if they push ZANU-PF, all you're going to have is another second GNU with the same ZANU-PF MDC players involved. SADC leaders, no SADC leader in his right mind would want that. What is the point? If they fail to implement even one token reform in 2008 to 2018, what makes you think they will implement reforms now? So I believe the task is with the people of Zimbabwe, particularly the intellectuals. You are the ones who have got to send a clear message to SADC that yes, we desperately need a second chance to implement the reforms. And yes, we are not going to have the same individuals who sold out during the first GNU playing a major role in the second one. Send that message through to SADC. I believe SADC will do their bit. Indeed, SADC have already placed their marker. The 2023 elections, SADC election observers condemned those elections as flawed and illegal. They said they failed to meet Zimbabwe's own requirements, constitutional requirements, and electoral act. And they failed to meet the SADC principles and guidelines governing democratic elections. That report was never withdrawn. It's still on the record. So 2028 elections, SADC, if they really wanted to, they can turn around and say, wait a minute, Zimbabwe are going to hold another election, and yet they have not implemented even one token reform from 2023. And I believe if the people of Zimbabwe were to play their part and say, we are not participating in a flawed electoral process, SADC will have good reason to act. And this recent meeting will only give them even more motivation to act. The ball is in Zimbabweans' quarters. We have to convince SADC. We have to make sure that SADC leaders know that we accept that Zimbabwe had a golden opportunity to implement the reforms during the GNU of 2008 to 2013. We dropped the ball. More so, our opposition leaders. We also appreciate that at the present moment, both ZANU-PF and the opposition MDC-CCC leaders have no motivation to implement reforms. All they want to do is keep participating in these flawed elections and share out the spoils of power. We cannot trust them to implement the reforms, even if we are given a second chance, a second GNU. We have to send a clear message out there that we do not believe that MDC and ZANU-PF leaders can play a major role in the second GNU and successfully implement any meaningful democratic reforms. If they fail to do so in the first one, what makes us believe that they'll do it now? That message we must hammer in. Absolutely. I'm glad that SADC leaders have come up with this report. We know that in the past, SADC has worked behind closed doors to pressure ZANU-PF to implement some reforms. It happened in 2008, and it can happen again. But what we want to send to SADC is the assurance that if they did their bit, this time we will see to it that the reforms are finally implemented. We will do our bit. Think about it. Thank you very much. Have a good evening.